States, but I live in Indonesia. I've been teaching overseas for 21 years. And this is, first time I put together a conference like this.
I'm Amanda Hamilton. I live in Michigan in the United States and teach in Michigan in the United States. I'm not a crazy traveler. I teach 4th grade and have not presented professional development to my colleagues, so this is something that I wanted to explore more because I feel like I'm getting so smart over here that I should not hold into my wealth of knowledge. So the way we're setting this up, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Birds of a Feather, but it's kind of like an open discussion between everyone, so we want to get everybody's opinions, and it's not just us presenting, but it's kind of like a round table, so feel free to jump in at any point. Dana's going to kind of get the discussion started.
Yeah, and you can also feel free to skip out at some point if you want to see something else. I mean, no one will be offended.
We put up the other sessions that are at this point. If you are here and you're feeling this isn't for you, you're more than welcome to quietly please leave. And we know that there's other presentations. There's 2 back-to-back during our longer time period, so you won't offend us. You could just exit quietly.
So after my first year of doing this course, last summer, I went back to my school and I felt like I had been sort of empowered with the idea that I had something I could share with my colleagues in terms of technology, but I didn't want to take on anything really huge because I don't think I'm an expert in any means, in any way, shape, or form. But I started out sort of casually sending out emails to people at school saying, okay, I'm going to provide an hour on Thursday afternoon. It's, I started out with improve your tech skills, and I just kind of listed some things. You can come. I said you can come to this. It'll be very casual. Come in and out if you want to. I'll look at this specific tool, and I'll show you how to do some things, and then we'll spend some time working with it, and very relaxed and very voluntary. And I got some really nice responses from it. And I start out every session by saying, I'm not an expert. I know a little bit, and I'm willing to share it with you. And after every session, I found out that I learned something from somebody in there. And at least one person in there learned something as well when they walked out. And I think that was a nice way to start. And I did it that way partially because our school had just started a one-to-one program. About 50% of the teachers were going from a PC to a Mac. So they weren't familiar with Macs. They weren't familiar with Apple tools. So I looked at the tools that we use in school and thought, okay, well, let's see if people know how to use Pages. Let's just do a little session on Pages and play around with it. And I just kind of looked at who the demographics were and tried to make it as unthreatening as possible because I think technology scares a lot of people. And they feel stupid or they feel like they can't do something. And I didn't want it to be like that. And so I really made a conscious effort to be kind about it in some ways and just let me show you, let me hold your hand a little bit, let you try it for a little bit and play. And I continued doing it throughout the year. And I didn't have to be an expert at it, but I could share the little bit that I had, and it grew from there, and people started learning from each other. And so I think that it wasn't official by any means, but it was effective. And so that's what we were trying to talk about, different ways that you can do that in your own schools.
And to go off of what Dana said about her just kind of presenting the opportunity, so instead of her going and saying, I'm an expert, I'm going to present all this to you, this is kind of the same idea we had with doing a Birds of a Feather versus a presentation so that we could all kind of collaborate, bounce ideas off of each other because neither of us are experts. And so we want to all open up the floor for everybody to share their ideas, share their experiences, and really collaborate to get some good ideas on how we can present professional development.
Any comments here? Okay, no. We give ourselves a cheat sheet. Has anyone given PD in a class at their schools? Okay. On technology or anything, or what else?
Technology.
Okay. And also tech? How did it go over? I mean, was it something that people were required to attend, or was it something that people would choose to be there for?
But they chose to be there, so you got the people that were interested, the people you wanted to talk to didn't turn up. So that's it. Of course, you're dealing. Obviously, I'm 59 and holding, but you see, you've got other people there who have young children, and as soon as school ends, they're gone. There's no question of being a during school. We have things now called Crow Park hours, which doesn't even recognise continuous professional development. That has planning, but apparently that's not actually penciled in.
Do you have, in Ireland, do you have, days set aside for professional development during the school year? I mean, that the students aren't attending, but as teachers, you're required to attend?
No.
No,
Oh, okay,
see, it's all essentially voluntary,
okay.
and you're going to get the people that obviously are interested in what you're doing, turning up. And the very fact that you put yourself forward, you're labelled as an expert from the beginning,
Oh, yeah.
but you are not. So it's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
And then you get lots of questions coming your way then too. Yep.
Yeah, I think that putting yourself forward though is important because we did a lot of external professional development. We felt really that they weren't really professionally developing us. So we started looking at, could we do this from within? Now it wasn't just in technology, it was in a number of areas. Now certainly you are putting yourself forward for a scalp the legs taken out from underneath you when things don't work. But at the same time, if you choose carefully and plan that certainly there are some things that will work or should work, when they happen, people say, gosh, that was great. Not because you changed, but actually because they changed. So if you are going to lead it yourself, it's not to set the bar too high, but to set a number of tasks or possibilities that not everyone, like this gentleman said, will buy into it, but those who do can achieve it, and they say, gosh, that worked, and then you're on the way.
And I think you can build kind of you can build a base, a person at a time, really.
I just follow up on that. I think it's very much an indictment of professional development here in Ireland that I've done it now. I'm slightly different. I'm working at a BC level, working with a number of schools, and I've gone into schools to do CPD as part of my job. But the people who do turn up are massively appreciative of the work that you do. And I know you say that there would often be that in Ireland, who does your man think he is, given in this session, and who is he thinking? But I 100% agree. Some of us have to somebody has to step up, or nobody will step up, and things will just get worse. It's an indictment of the professional development here, the formal structure that exists in Ireland, that people aren't getting what they need. And I think that's reflected in the appreciation you do get when somebody does come. And it's like that. Every time somebody comes in, they say, I learned something. And then you as a trainer or somebody providing the session will always learn something as well. So I know it does take a certain amount of leadership for people to step up, but those people who come across the door will always appreciate that.
Yeah.
I found my experience in trying to do PD. I work internationally in Lebanon at an American community school, and both in the United States and in Lebanon, professional development consisted of a very one-way kind of situation, even for people who were quote-unquote in-house. So a great example is one day I was asked by my principal, could you tell people how to do this particular thing in Moodle? We saw you did this. How many of you are familiar with Moodle? So, okay, so the vast majority of you, it's a class management system, basically, for those who are playing along. And I was apparently doing something that was considered magic by other teachers. I had a multiple file upload issue, right? And so I had 5 minutes to explain to the teachers how to do it. This was their idea of professional development.
Yeah.
And I basically said, why don't you all come by my classroom if you have any questions? And a couple of people, to their credit, did. But I kind of feel like tech is always one of those things where the principal says, oh, that's really interesting. Tell somebody about it. And you find yourself becoming an expert, but it's almost like a drive-by expert. Look what I have. And then it's over.
Drive-by PD.
Yes.
But then maybe possibly in technology that's what is needed. I am principal, and the problem for me is trying. Staff are saying, we really want professional development. You get it all set up, and then as this gentleman says, well, it's not in park hours and it's not in school time, and they're not getting to choose to go. So I think possibly shorter, snappier sessions on what they want. There's a group here in Ireland, the CESI group, the CESI. And they have these little meets where they come together and each individual stands up and gives 5 minutes talk on something. And you can learn so much in those few minutes than spending 2 hours on how to upload a story to a file like that. So for me, in learning, in growing as a leader and an educator, I'm learning that providing long CPD sessions isn't working. And even though I'm listening to the needs of the staff, I think shorter, you know, maybe pinpointed group sessions, and maybe even inviting local schools and us all coming together, and then making it optional, you know, like, well, this is on the cards on a Monday or a Friday, you know, do you want to come? And it's coming from within. It may be the way forward here in Ireland, because there is quite a negative spin at the moment to attending for functionary, you know, CPD after school hours.
What did you call those sessions?
CESIM.
Computer Education
Computer
Society.
Education Society of Ireland.
Yes, that's how you used the website.
Yeah.
I think I know for me, last year being a first year in this program and having 900 programs thrown in my face, I think as an educator going back to my school last year, I was trying to really pick out the ones that I thought would be the most useful in my school situation. I started small with just my teaching team, and I know you mentioned people with babies rushing home after school, so I was really trying to push Google Docs on my 2 teaching partners, and it didn't work, but I harassed them to the point where they just said, forget it. But trying to really filter through all of these tools that we may know and figure out which ones would be the most beneficial, and instead of saying, here, we know this and this and this and this and this, just starting with 1 or 2, because I think that is another part of the non-threatening. When you see all of these things, it seems so overwhelming, and I think that's where a lot of people who aren't tech savvy just kind of push it away and say, forget that, it's too much, I'm not doing it. So, obviously that didn't really work for me, but for data.
I think maybe just when you mentioned your teaching assistant structure, it's something that I'm looking at, and I think it's something that I think is quite interesting. Just was looking at new structures of CPD. Like the school I teach in is close on 100 teachers, so the idea of putting 100 people in the room, we're only wasting time. And that idea of you with 2 or 3 is something I'm looking at, trying to set up professional learning teams. And for me as a coordinator, I go in and I maybe have 8 people to speak to, who would then have 3. So if you can, I'm looking at this idea of maybe creating groups of 4s with an expert for other 3. And it takes away that public element of somebody having to walk across a door in a room, or, and this idea I'm trying to get is this ongoing, this has to be self-sustaining. And there's not the money for the external people to come in, nor will there be the momentum, because once those people leave, they're gone, and you might see them again in maybe 18 months' time. So that structure, which I'm very interested to hear, that you have teaching assistants in it, so maybe it's a formalised structure. We wouldn't have that in Ireland. Maybe you'd have subject departments, would be something like that. But I even think there's a value of not departmentalising it, subject specific. Just have 3 or 4, group of 3 or 4 people, common interest, and one person takes the responsibility maybe for those 3. Is the way, I think it probably long term is the way to work.
Well, even a setup like at the end of the conference, we're going to have a mixer, and you might have seen the signs posted in the hallway where we have a Twitter spot and a blog spot and a cloud spot where the year 2s will be posted to kind of start just those discussions, so people can choose which one. So I think that would be a really good idea to just maybe, I'm sure you would probably out of 100 people get some volunteers who might say, oh sure, I'm comfortable with this, I can facilitate a discussion. And then that would avoid getting outside people, but I like that idea of smaller groups because it is.
Is that formal in America? You say you have teaching assistants?
Oh, my teaching partners, I teach 4th grade, so the other 2 teachers who also teach 4th grade.
Right.
So we work in professional learning communities, are big in my school.
Okay.
So even within my 4th grade team, something that might work for us might not work for the 2nd grade teachers. So I think starting out by saying everyone has to use this, or just having one thing that you're introducing would also deter people. So I really like that idea of the smaller group.
There's another site worth looking at is etwinning.net. There's 140,000 teachers in that all over Europe. Now, I'm an eTwinning ambassador, so I go around Europe. I teach podcasting and stuff like that. But definitely, English is now the common language. And it's amazing to see the difference in the various educational policies, not even the way they put things across, the way schools are structured and so on. So it definitely comes back into the classroom. You'll see people changing the way they do things. So it's free, and there's constant learning events on in the night time. So you'll be brought in, and you'll obviously get used to different accents and so on.
Speaking of different accents, how do you spell it?
It's just etwinning, etwinning.net.
Just a suggestion, do we need to put a meeting up so that we can post all of this stuff?
We don't, but you feel free in this in the PowerPoint. Yep, here you can go to the tiny URL.
Yeah.
So feel free, post in this. Everyone should have access. I've been taking notes, but you are more than welcome. Add anything you have, whether you heard someone else say it or you are too shy to speak up.
It's funny sometimes how professional development works. We did a group of teachers set up an animation club. Now we brought in someone for a day to teach the animation itself, the technology. And we brought the person that came in and taught teachers and students together, which in Irish secondary school or high school was one of the first times that somebody came in and the students were teachers and students. Now the teacher behind this, he very much wanted to see that to be a number of subject departments were coordinating this club, but it would be all ages from 1st through to 6th year, so it wouldn't just be 15-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 17, 18-year-olds, it would be across the ages. Now this new junior cert that's coming through, we're hoping to kind of mainstream some of this. So it started with a club, some teacher development and student development happened around it. But those teachers now are at a stage that they're confident to look at introducing it into their subject areas. The subject areas are quite diverse. There's art, there's our Irish language, there's English drama, and so on. So there's a number of things that come together.
Yeah, I mean, like Amanda, my team that I worked with this year was an English and social studies team, and we had 6 people in there, and about 3 of us were, had a certain level of comfort with different technological skills, and the other 3 really didn't. But that was a team that had to work together. We were using common assessments for different things, so we would decide, we would look at different tools. What kind of tool would be a good one to help enhance what we were doing in our learning in that whatever unit we were studying, and we would support each other through it. I mean, so there was always somebody you could go to say, okay, well, I've tried this, now what? And so it was a little bit of a kind of a PD in there too, an element of it, but within our team, because we were producing something at the end, so it was necessity as well to know how to use the tools.
I think, just that point, I think CPD, for it to be effective, especially in the technology space, because again, looking what's happening in Irish education, a lot of schools are moving to one-to-one now, and you can see a momentum behind it. The support there has to be at elbow. It can't be at the end of the phone, or it can't be the training officer will be out next Tuesday. It has to be in the school, it has to be at elbow, and somebody can be able to say, here, can you show me how to? And if your structure doesn't have that, it will fall.
You're right, and that's part of the reason why that was another aspect of the motivation for me to do September School, is because we do have a tech team at school, and we do have a technology integrator at my school who, whenever you asked him to do something, he'd say, well, make an appointment in my Google Calendar. Well, if you're a little bit worried about tech in the first place, trying to figure out how to make that appointment is difficult. So it's like, here, let me slam the door now. All right. I mean, so I thought you can't do that to people. You have to be more accessible. And I think it's if you have any ability, any kind of knowledge about it, you got to be able to share it, and you have to be willing to take that step.
I think there's a teacher requirement there. Where I work as well, we would have an ICT coordinator who was a techie guy, but unfortunately the teaching skills or the communication skills are very different, and his visible frustration dissuades people from coming back for assistance.
Exactly.
So they come to the non-expert like me instead of the teacher. So I think the structure within the school is as this chap said, is vital. I think you can facilitate that. The difficulty I find is the vast range of abilities, which I'm sure is common amongst the other school experiences as well, those who are utterly lacking in confidence and competence to those who actually know a lot more and maybe could share it. So it's managing that, which I like the title of your talk, the non-threatening management of that is what I want to hear people do well in.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything they want to address that? The idea of doing it in a non-threatening manner?
Yeah, we've tried several things in our school. I teach at the American School in Paris, although we have a great reputation in terms of integration of technology. I think we're lagging behind. One of the reasons is because a lot of my colleagues really don't see how they can apply technology in their classroom. So we started with the idea, as we're in France, with Breakfast 2.0, instead of Web 2.0. We just ended up eating a lot of croissant that went through a field. So last year we had a woman in tech, and that was really nice to have because she was a very gentle, soft-spoken woman. Because my female colleagues said that the man doesn't know how to explain things properly. I said that's true. Anyway, and that was great because we could go to her whenever we wanted to do something, and she always suggested how we could use technology to enhance our learning. But it was really limited in time. So next year we're gonna have we've got a TLC, which is a tech learning center that's going to be manned all day, before school, during the day and after school, either by very competent high school students or by, we have an integration team also, so there's going to be somebody in that room all the time from 8 until 6, and any teacher can go up there to get some help or some advice, or come in with an idea or a unit of study, and the tech integrator will help them plan some what kind of tools we can use for integration. And I said I agree that the non-threatening part of it that is essential.
Patricia, did you want to say something?
I was in a similar situation last year, having finished year 2 of the MSU program, and it was very awkward for me, it still continues to be awkward, to go back to my school and feel like I can step over someone in order to give instruction or assistance. We have the same situation where a tech coordinator is usually too busy or really doesn't know the right answer. So what I've done with a few people is we've just kind of instigated the tech minutes at the staff meetings where people just take turns and introduce a piece of technology. And it's 1 to 2 minutes and it's totally non-threatening, and we have the open door policy later on. But it is awkward because there is often someone in the school who is in charge, and you cannot necessarily walk over them.
And I kind of chose to ignore it, which was, it hasn't made me any friends in that sense with that person, but I don't care, because I think that I have created a situation where there are people who will come and ask me stuff, and even if I don't know it, I'll ask somebody else, and I'll work around it, but I think it's, like I said, I think it's essential that we have to be there to support each
The
other.
backdoor assistance that happens.
Yeah.
As far as the public assistance, it does have to be non-threatening sometimes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, technical difficulties as always. You now all can edit the document. So jump in there and add your thoughts.
There was 2 approaches I've heard of it now in other schools, or 2 other schools I've heard of it, just to be talking about the threatening thing. There's a school in Cavan I heard of a phenomenal idea, and they've got really good feedback. And they've gone to a one-to-one iPad scheme in their school. But there's a group of students who've been set up as designated committee, and every week the students come back with some app or some piece of technology that they present to a committee of staff, 3 or 4 people, that the student says, and again, we find value in this, we think this will be a really interesting class, here's something we can look at. And then the school can either take it in and say, yeah, we're going to use that, and then that's passed on to teachers or not. So what they actually have is their students doing the legwork. And the students come to them with apps that they found of an interest, and then just present it to staff, and then of course the guy, the vice principal, is kind of run the project, of course he said we take most of it, you know what I mean? Because there's huge ownership then on the technology from the students. And the other thing that we're actually looking at in, now I don't know if it's non-threatening, but again, it's that extra support. Currently in Ireland there's a national intern program called JobBridge. And I've heard 1 or 2 schools have done this, where they've hired a JobBridge intern. Now you'll only get the JobBridge for a maximum of 9 months, but we're hiring a JobBridge intern exclusively for the one-to-one support of teachers training. So it doesn't cost the school anything. The person, it's a way of getting people back into work who are unemployed. And there's a 9-month support there for 35 hours a week, and it allows one-to-one. Because schools would never afford that person's role. A tech person like you is a tech person. Right? It's got to the stage now where people come to me and they go, what do I do? I said, don't talk to him, just hand him a note and usually he'll fix it in a day or 2. So just don't talk to the tech person, let him live in his hovel and let him do what he needs to do. But this JobBridge person, I think, will have a role exclusively for teacher training, no kind of tech fixing. He's not fixing screens, broken mouses, all that kind of, but the school will get them for free for 9 months.
Great.
It's a one-off solution. You can't have 2 interns. You only have them once, but it may be something that allows people, especially the weaker people, they can go and sit in an office one-to-one, and they don't have to put their hand up and say, I don't know how to use PowerPoint.
That's right. Did you?
Just on the non-threatening point, I work with doctorate level, and I teach lecturers how to integrate technology into their classroom. What works very much for me is when I turn around and tell them I solve a problem that they have, rather than tell them about Google or YouTube or what have you. I say, well, you have a problem correcting a vast amount of lectures. Here's how you can use YouTube to do it. So don't advertise the technology, but advertise the solution that you're offering. And then they'll come to you. Because if you tell them, enter on the Google Calendar, well, oh no, I can't do
That
that.
was terrible. No wonder people wouldn't contact them because they couldn't. They didn't know how.
Exactly.
You know?
But if you tell them that you can get their students to generate a whole lot of
That's right.
assessments for the rest of their peers that you don't have to do anything, they'll turn up.
And that's, I mean, yeah, it's true. And showing, like, we also did a lot with showing how we used something. Like you said, well, here's, we were doing this, blah, 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 and here's what we came up with, and this is what it looks like. Well, now you've got this really great looking product here that's really incorporated. In my situation, was a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of, that was like the old school skills, right? But then also all the technological skills that went into making a really polished looking piece. You can show that to people and say, it's not that hard to do, let me show you. One step at a time.
We have taken as part of the course that I get the lecturers to do. They create a screencast, which they're limited to 5 minutes with a particular technology, screenhour.com, and they log on, create a screencast, which is essentially a description, a presentation from themselves and how they use the technology to solve a particular problem, and then they're showcased then to all the rest of the participants. So one person shares their idea with the rest of the class. So that works quite well.
Last thing I've been doing is actually at my school initiating a tech program. I teach the entire 9th grade. It's a fairly small school, so it's 4 classes. And basically it's becoming a technology showcase classroom. So the idea is that teachers, if they want to on their off time, or they can plan in their own day to come visit my class to see some of the things they're doing to interact with the students and to watch how the students use certain types of technology. And I'm finding that when teachers did this informally with me last year, they were much more likely to use the technology if they saw their students using it. It was the immediate, and sometimes it was a sense of, oh my God, my students know how to do that, I need to figure that out. And other times it was, oh, I hadn't thought of that before. And I found that to be really, being willing to open your classroom seems to be a really effective way of doing it.
But also be willing to admit that you don't know something.
Yes.
You see it in action.
That's essential.
Yeah, teachers fear sometimes, oh God, I don't want to admit to my students I don't know how to use X, Y, Z technology.
Right.
Though I have to say, I do say that fairly often, because I always have students who know something I don't know. And it's pretty exciting to have them share me something.
Yes, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. Have you done PD with some of the work in your, would you share with us what kind of things you've done?
Sure. I came in after my last session, so I don't know what you guys have talked about. But at my school, I was the science and language arts teacher, and we had a tech facilitator at our school. So luckily, I got on a really good page with her and looked at her and told her I could kind of lighten her load by doing some of the things. So we got the new Promethean active expression clickers at our school last year. So she allowed me to roll that out with the staff. And anytime we kept it much more informal, I just opened an invite to everybody saying, come and see if you'd like to come. And I'll show you how to use this and I'll help you set them up. Then they showed up. But when it was something that was mandated in the past, people didn't want to come because they were just really scared. I mean, anytime you incorporate technology, there's just a fear that goes with it. But so we had a lot of success by doing that, and then during the day, like during my prep, I would go into their classrooms and help them run it the first time, just kind of in that initial getting your feet wet stage. But it is fun when you're doing one because, I mean, we had people who just learned that year how to create a calendar in a Word document. Like, that was this one teacher I was working on a project with. She was like, I finally figured out how to do a Word document calendar. So, and having her ready for these clickers was just at another level. So that really eased them into it, which I thought was really successful. But on the alternate hand, at my school, after I did that, those 2 workshops and tried to integrate some more, because I also did, like Patricia, the tech tips at the staff meetings. they told me I couldn't present anymore, my administration, because they didn't like that I was kind of opening up these options to the staff. So that's always something that you have to keep in mind too. You're not only threatening your colleagues by bringing them into an uncomfortable experience, but you're threatening the administration of your building as well, because they don't know what you're teaching other people, and that's scary for them.
So how do we get around that? I mean, how do we make that, how do we change that?
I invited them to everything I did, and nobody ever came to it. No administration ever saw any of my PDs or workshops. But they were quick to pull the cord after everybody was excited about it. But I just kept very open dialogue. I recommended some other things for them, and that eased them a little bit. But we started to use Google Docs for our staff meetings and our agendas to show them that it's not evil. I think there's that, because, oh my gosh, our teachers are going to be communicating more about work. Like that is scary because they're afraid of what you're going to say. And that's a lot of power that they're putting in your hands. So we did that, and then to kind of get around that, but still follow their guidelines, any email I sent to the staff, whether it was like, I need a Tylenol because I don't know what your school, people email the whole school about everything. I would put a tech tip in the bottom of it. I would put daily tech tip to Candace and put in something interesting. Because that, I just think that's so valuable, and it is such a hard system to work in.
I think it's also hard sometimes when you get we all have the people who are there saying, nope, not doing it. This has always been fine for me. It's always going to be fine for me. I don't know why you want to do all that. I think that's a hard one to get beyond that too. And how do we do it? I don't know the answers.
Yeah.
I just recognize,
I like that idea though, Candace, of sliding in little tuck tips here and there, whether it's at the bottom of an email or, at staff meetings, to just kind of open up people's eyes to what there is and different things that they could do. And at the end of the day, a lot of it is just making their lives easier. And I was trying to take notes. So whoever said about making, I just totally lost my train of thought. Advertising the solution instead of the tool, I think that's really, really smart. Saying, I can help you, this function better in your classroom. Let me show you how. I think that's a really, really smart way to go.
Easily communicate with parents, that's always one track. I do a lot of 3:05 in the afternoon tech teaching, or even on weekends, because we spend a lot of time on weekends. That helps a lot.
How do you tackle then the issue, and the same with your example where you'd have a coordinator or a subject expert in a particular technology, of rewarding that person for all the extra effort and time that is coming to it, that's involved in that, because you have their colleague who's not interested at all, whether for genuine or just laziness reasons, and their pay is the same as the person who's breaking his or her back trying to get on this technology. So that's the elephant in the room, really, at the end of the day. Whether you label it, in our case, Crow Park or unions or whatever, or the problem is international. How do you reward that person for doing the extra bit?
Well, I think that stems back to just your personal attitude on what your goal is. I'm sure Candace did all of that extra work with the intention of just helping others and spreading what she knows,
That's right.
rather than pay more.
I didn't give you medal for that.
So,
Getting in a little trouble is always
so I think if you're in it for the common good of helping the teachers so they can further the education of students, because that's why we're all in this anyways. It's not for the large paychecks every week. I think you kind of have to approach it with that attitude.
But I think what you're saying is a good point, that like for someone like myself who has to lead the staff to develop the quality of teaching and learning, and there are colleagues who are not confident using technology and are not confident, they're also not willing to develop. It has to kind of transfer that above the common good, and it is a key question, like how do you reward them? And a lot of it is that, well, God, aren't you doing a great job, and sure, aren't you the great one? But there needs to be something more than that, and I don't know what it is.
The SESI presentations they work incredibly well, and I've been to several of the meets, which what they refer to throughout the country. But one of the bigger ones this year had 100 people there. We have 4,000 schools in the country, and we had 100 people there. So we're only getting to a small audience, and in fairness, we're meeting the same people at these SESI meets that are around the different. So the goodwill is only stretching so far, and keeping that momentum going is the challenge, really. Keeping that momentum of goodwill going while they help you out.
But I have seen schools now, the current teacher allocation has impacted massively in this summer. But I know of schools who have done, those people who kind of stood up and became kind of tech leaders in the school were given a class a week. Now I know maybe that's not it, so we're given an extra class a week, whatever, contracted for 22 hours. So these people, they were only in contact hours for 20, so they were given a class period a week off. I know Galway VC is a big scheme, and at the end of the year, now, because it wasn't advertised beforehand, because you get people jumping in for the technology and not using it, but at the end of the first year, the people who had stepped up and took the leadership, they were given, he said you can have an iPad or an Asus Transformer at the end of the year. And like the tech guy who said to me, he said it was the best 500 quid we spent on those people ever. He said we probably got 20 times back, you know what I mean? Teachers do take appreciation, but
without sounding disheartening, I mean, that's obviously, it works at second or third level, at first level, at primary level, and with 75% of 3,500 schools having teaching principals, you know, there isn't even a principal to jump in, and it's just something we have to find an answer to. Like, I think absolutely that's a great idea at that level. It's just, and I wouldn't diss it at all, it's just to find an answer, I suppose, at those schools where possibly there is a smaller staff. I mean, I go to, as a school of 170 children, and yet I'm a teaching principal. I teach 33 children, and I run a business. So I don't have any time in my 80-hour week to take another class in on top. You know, but I do think in a bigger school, I think even in a primary school where there's a walking principal, an admin principal, that could be an idea. Like, I'm going to take, you know, your class for a half hour. Could you go in and do some modelling for that teacher there? I mean, that it can work in that sense.
There's a district in the States that does things very, very poorly, but one of the things they do well is that their tech training comes with that bonus. If you have X number of hours of tech training on Saturdays or after school, then you get whatever piece of equipment that you have qualified for, and it's very effective. So it's similar to what you're saying. You go to.
And sorry, do they have for like a matrix, if you do 10 hours you get an iPad?
Essentially, yes. And you do have some choices as to what you get, so you are able to choose what is effective for your classroom. But again, it probably pays itself back many times over.
Easily pays itself back.
And it makes more sense because otherwise what happens is technology is dumped into people's classrooms and it's never even opened because no one knows to use it. This way you have to learn how to use it before you receive it. And that makes a huge difference. I know we're rewarded kind of in a back way that if technology is available, new technology is available, we must apply for it. And of course, if we can show that we've assisted other people in integrating technology, then we have that edge. It's not guaranteed, but it does help. I think that piece is that way.
I think the big problem at first level, back to my teacher principal colleague here, is the lack of support out there. It's all very well for those who choose to go to a assessing meet on a Saturday or whatever else, but I think we need to look at ways in which, I suppose, those who have a little bit of knowledge can share it more effectively. I think the system in Ireland is where primary teachers choose or opt in to do in-service courses at the end of their school semester, if you like, and it's a sort of a carrot and donkey kind of approach where, rather than stick where you do 5 days in service, you get 3 days benefit for the year to take at your own need. But I think we need to look at things like the In Touch magazine, where teachers do read it. A lot of teachers read it, and there needs to be more of the sharing of tech tips in a less threatening manner that can reach those small schools where there is no technical expert available. We did have, I suppose, support services through the education centres, but in the very first round of cutbacks they were pulled, which were a huge loss to schools.
Very fast.
Through the education centres. That was a face in the place that you could actually go to and say, look, I need a hand here, and so there isn't the support services there, really. I don't know if it's NCT or others, but I think there isn't the people on the ground, so we have to be a bit more creative in how we reach these teachers.
Yeah, I think a lot of teachers in Ireland worldwide are creating resources, but not creating the resources you're creating. And Mark was mentioning this, we were talking about this before the conference today. And again, those of just think a lot of Moodle users in the room, and people are creating resources all over the place. But yes, we fail to centralise them and then make them appropriate for our context. You Irish primary, Irish secondary, you know, French secondary, whatever. You know, and it's to. I think you could save a lot of time if we could.
That's interesting you say that, because that happens at third level, and you might be more familiar around the NDLR, which is that repository at third level, which is all about shared community practice and sharing the resources. Would you see that kind of a model working at a primary and second level?
They're looking to expand the NDLR after Christmas to secondary and primary. The NDLR is the National Digital Learning Resources, ndlr.ie, and it's a website that has teaching resources created by educators for educators, essentially. There's certain types of lessons that it's freely available to anybody, but there's some elements that are restricted. You need to be an NDLR member. But any educator with a recognised school email or college email address will have automatic membership for it and free for it. ndlr.ie. N for Nigel, D for digital, L for learning, R for resources.
Okay.
.ie.
Sorry. You guys want to add your own resources?
Yeah. We use the test one an awful lot. In the UK, you know, I'm foreign language teacher, French and Spanish, so you know there'll be some areas where, say, I don't know, for history, which with our curriculum would be very different from UK to Ireland. But the London Times, the newspaper, have the Times Educational Supplement, the TES.co.uk. Phenomenal, like thousands upon thousands of resources there, freely available, and again, created by educators, developed by, and say for an area like French or Spanish, where the content is essentially the same, it would be very different, there wouldn't be a huge amount of difference between the two curricula. It's a resource that we just come in, adjust slightly, and you I think that's a phenomenal. And like that one would go right down to primary.
Yeah, the
NDLR
NDLR taps
primary,
into,
secondary, yeah.
it taps into its counterpart in the UK and also in the US. I think Merlo is the database system in the US, as in the wine. But it also taps into the UK equivalent as well. So.
Well, and I think tying back to Fred Voss, his whole keynote was about Twitter. How many of you knew about the conference from Twitter? So I think that is a very valuable resource, and especially the hashtag, the website he put up, Cybrarian, that had all of those educational hashtags. I think would be a great resource to just be able to contact people from all over the place. And I know I've tweeted things out, or I know Lee uses that all the time, and we'll just tweet things out and kind of throw it out there and get all sorts of responses that you would never even expect. So
we should try and translate it. We should hashtag that ad nauseum. That's what we did in Sessi, and we tried it for the whole country. And it's the way to get your actual brand out there as well. The other thing I was thinking about, just for small CPD, Google Plus is great now. You can get 10 people on video. They've got the bandwidth now. I had people on Gothenburg the other day, and they were like, the sound quality now is fantastic. And you might as well be in the same room. And one that was right up at the university, right at the top there. It was great to see everybody, and it's definitely the way to go. Because you have to pay, if you want more than one person on video on Skype, you have to pay. It's a premium service. And Google Plus is actually, it's free now. The only problem we had, we were trying to connect with somebody in Malta, and it's going through a satellite, so we've got latency problems. So other than that, it works out very, very well.
the bandwidth in my district is back. Tuesday. I said the bandwidth in my district is.
Yeah.
Lebanon has the world's slowest internet. It's really sad to live in a country that's slower than the Democratic Republic of Congo. Just putting context.
Talking about Congo, I was talking to the teacher about connecting with a school on the internet in Congo, so they don't have a phone.
Yeah.
So that was the end of that. Like, there's no question of even satellite or anything else. You don't even have a phone, so you have to go into a town. So we're presuming people have these resources, and in fact, they don't have the basic resources.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Are there any burning questions or topics? Anybody?
I'd just like to get back to the thing of students helping out. They like, and they do that in England, you know, they have these digital leaders and all of that. And I think, you know, say I'm in a primary school and I teach infants, but, you know, if I'm going to show them something new, there's times I might get the older classes to come down and help. But sometimes we have students in on work experience from secondary schools, and they only maybe come for a week at a time. But if I can get my hands on them, it's great, because, you know, they actually naturally know a lot more than the primary school children do. And it is something that we talked about in EdChat way back, near at the very start, that if we could kind of link up the 3 levels, the primary, the secondary and the 3rd level, and maybe get even 3rd level students at some point to come in, even to primary or into secondary schools, and help out that way. Not only help the teachers, but help the children, and then to them to go out and help the others. I think, you know, something really worth looking at.
How about if we train the 3rd level, train the transition year students,
Yeah,
and
that's
then
what
part of their work experience, then send them back out to the
yeah,
primary?
yeah. And like we have a transition year where, you know, it's kind of between exams, like between the junior cert and their leaving cert, and very often they come out for a week at a time. But, you know, maybe that could be rearranged, that it could come out maybe 1 day a week or something like that, even for a term, you know. And, you know, I think it's a whole area that needs to be looked at. You know, pass on the knowledge that way.
It's a creative solution, isn't it? I mean, it's a way to think around.
Yeah.
Candace?
I was just wondering, playing off of that and trying to get those smaller, you know, communities and networks of teachers involved, if teachers as a whole kind of be more willing to accept that understanding from a student, where there's less fear instead of another adult coming at them with information. I think that has a lot of potential. Because if a student's training your students in the classroom, I would absolutely go up to them and say, can you show me what you're doing too? Instead of another adult, you're put back because you're worried about what they're thinking of you at that same point.
And I mean, a lot of the students, they do know a lot more than us at this stage. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
like as I say, I teach 5-year-olds and they talk about their iPads at home and this, that and the other. So they are ahead of us, you know.
There are things that are ahead of us and other things they're not. I mean,
Yes,
that's why we have to be doing it together, really. But yeah, I mean, I've also seen situations in my school where one student will be taught how to do something, and then that student is the one who goes around that same classroom. Who's the expert on that? Okay, you go help him now. Whatever, and they're sharing that information with each other.
Yes.
And it grows.
We also have the multicultural element of things, like we, reflection on anybody else's religion here, but we have Muslim families in our school, and they're dead against anything on these, and even group photographs. Short of putting a bag over the child's head in a group photograph, there's no way of knowing that you're ever in the class. So you end up leaving without, the boys don't care. The boys have got it.
Yes.
But the girls, they don't like the girls in photographs. So it's a lot of little niggly things like that.
Well, thank you all for coming. If you go to our website, there is a feedback survey. You don't have to do it right this second, but at the end, we just kind of want to plug there. It just went live. You're the first to know. It's right on the homepage. The register link turned to the feedback survey link. So if you at some point can do it later at home, we would really, really appreciate all of your feedback. Thank you.
And I think you have about 5 minutes before the next options.